Homeless girls touching Plea Marine at gas station reveals transformative act that amazed 10. Jake pulled into the gas station, the hum of pumps and chatter enveloping him like a whirlwind. His old pickup truck, worn and rusty, seemed to scream for attention, much like he felt deep inside. Faded, exhausted. He stared at the high-gloss cars surrounding him, their polished exteriors reflecting a life he once craved but could no longer pretend to belong to. As he stepped out and began to refuel, something caught his eye. A girl no older than 10, sitting against the brick wall, her face drawn and her spirit dulled by life's harshness. Her sign read, "Please help. I'm hungry." As memories surged back, nights spent shivering in a home that felt more like a prison than a sanctuary, Jake felt a storm brewing in his chest. The girl's tattered clothes, the unkempt hair, the desperate plea ignited a spark of compassion within him. He hesitated, recalling his own troubled childhood, a gulf between their worlds that felt insurmountable yet somehow intimate. Could one act of kindness change anything? Would it erase the ghosts that haunted him nightly, whispering regret and fears of inadequacy? The weight of his own past seemed to collide with the weight of her present. The memories from his time in the military crept in the shadows, echoing with the faces of lost comrades and the chaos of distant battles. He swallowed hard, nervously squeezing the gas nozzle, fighting back the tremors threatening to consume him. How absurd that he, a once proud Marine, now stood at a gas station wrestling with his own demons, exposing himself to the harsh reality of another's suffering. "What's your name?" he asked, kneeling in front of her. Lily looked up, her eyes darting as if gauging his intentions. He could see the sides of uncertainty and defiance tangled in her expression, small yet defiant against the vastness of the world. "Lily," she replied softly, her voice quaking. Their connection was instantaneous, binding them through shared adversity, through battles they fought alone. She revealed her story in fragmented whispers, talking of an abusive home, the decision to run being her only glimpse of hope. Each word chipped away at Jake's steeled facade, his heart breaking at the thought of a child left to fend for herself. He hesitated, held captive by the depth of her struggle. His instinct clamored for action. The echo of his military training urged him to help, yet a pang of anxiety reminded him of his vulnerability. Would he be enough to navigate this storm swirling around them both? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Jake's resolve hardened as he pulled out his old phone, the device trembling in his grasp. He began filming, his voice quaking as he recounted Lily's bravery. As he spoke, fear gripped him. What if this act of courage backfired? What if sharing her truth led to judgment rather than compassion? Doubt filled the air, thick enough to suffocate even the smallest hope. He could feel the eyes of the community hovering somewhere in the shadows of his mind, caught between admiration for their righteous cause and the paralyzing sense of being exposed. As they shared this personal moment, he sensed the tension building. The stakes had become too high, intertwining their fates in a way that terrified him yet excited him to his core. Suddenly, the crowd began to swell around him, faces familiar and shadowy from long-forgotten days. As he prepared to share Lily's full story at the looming community meeting, one figure cut through the crowd like a knife, a ghost from his past. Heart racing, he stood at a precipice between two lives, the one defined by trauma and the other, a flickering chance for redemption. What he lost was inching closer to the surface, just as the voices around them clamored for truth, leaving Jake restless inside, straddling the edge of everything he feared, yet everything he longed to embrace. Jake felt the pressure in his chest heightening, close to becoming unbearable. The figure in the crowd, a man with a familiar gait and a face changed by years and hard choices, was Richard, his former battle buddy, who had returned from combat a broken man. The chaos in Jake's mind intensified as Richard ambled forward, his silhouette sending a frigid wave of memories crashing through him. The last time they had spoken had been a confrontation over choices that still haunted Jake. He had often staunched the bleeding of his past by focusing on helping others, but Richard was a raw nerve, reminding him of the fragility of life, the choice to survive. "Hey, Jake." Richard's voice, gravelly and low, rolled through the air like an unfriendly tide. Jake had been prepared to face judgment from countless eyes, but this was personal. "Richard," Jake replied, his voice steadier than he felt. It was absurd how quickly the past could come rushing back, how a single person could invoke years of suppressed guilt and regret. Richard's once bright demeanor had dulled under the weight of disappointment. Jake's palms prickled with sweat, and the phone he clutched felt like an anchor dragging him into murky depths. "Doing a good thing here, huh?" Richard's tone was layered, laced with thinly veiled sarcasm. "Or are you just playing savior?" The crowd was drawn into the current between them, intrigue weaving through their whispers. Jake's heart pounded, caught between the urge to defend his actions and the awareness of the truth that lay in Richard's words. The good thing he thought he was doing for Lily now felt as fragile as glass. "Lily's story matters," Jake insisted, the words spilling from him with unexpected conviction. He realized he wasn't just trying to convince Richard. He was grappling against the doubts swirling within himself. "If I can help her, maybe I can help myself too." A moment of silence passed before Richard nodded slowly. It was a small gesture, but the acknowledgement shifted something within Jake. Perhaps this was not merely a burden, but a bridge, a chance to reclaim lost fragments of himself through another's suffering. "Just be careful," Richard warned, his voice lowering. "Not everyone wants to hear her truth, and some won't forgive you for digging it up." He studied Jake intently, as if trying to see beyond layers of bravado and insecurity. Jake felt the enormity of responsibility settle over him, heavier than before. He had faced many battles, but this one was distinct, a personal reckoning, a challenge to confront his fears, not just for himself, but for Lily too. The pulse in his veins became a persistent reminder that change was looming on the horizon, yet he faltered on the edge, unsure how to step forward. Taking a deep breath, he turned toward the small girl, her innocent eyes wide and patient, filled with hope yet swirling with uncertainty, mirroring the inner conflict he faced. "Lily," he began, needing her strength to fuel his resolve. "Are you ready to tell your story?" As she nodded slowly, he could feel the ground beneath him shifting, trembling with the potential of what this moment could unlock, not just for her, but for him. The crowd's tension sharpened, their collective breath caught in anticipation, and Jake prepared to leap beyond his limits, a point of no return unfolding before him. But was he truly ready to face the shadows that had lurked in the corners of his soul all along? With the crowd poised for revelation and shadows of doubt still dancing in his mind, Jake took another step forward. He realized he had a choice, to drift back into the safety of silence, or to charge forth into the unknown, armed with the truth that could reshape both their lives. The moment of truth loomed closer, but an unwanted fear clutched at his chest. Would their story transcend pain, or further entangle him in the chains of regret? Jake looked at Lily, her small stature almost swallowed by the gravity of the moment. This wasn't merely a chance to tell her story. It was a phase shift for him. He could feel the crowd's palpable tension, their eyes heavy with expectation. Yet it was the weight of his own conscience that truly pressed upon him. Could he trust himself to carry Lily's truth? Could he face the inevitable backlash that would come with unveiling the layers of pain that sought to bind them both? "Lily," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need you to know that your truth is powerful, and it deserves to be heard." He paused, the strength in his voice faltering as memories of Richard's accusations replayed in his mind. The voices from the past echoed, selfishness, savior complex, not listening. But Jake was learning with every breath, every moment in this fragile web of life, to weave purpose into his existence. Before he could doubt himself further, he turned to the crowd. "This little girl has lived a life we can't even begin to imagine." The murmurs hushed, the clarity of his intent drawing them in. "This is about more than just her. It's about all of us finding the courage to share our stories, to confront those uncomfortable truths that linger in the shadows. His heart raced as he felt the inhabitants of the crowd shifting. Some were visibly affected, some skeptical, but all were engaged. A patch of silence enveloped them, thick enough to cut. The air held a current charged with unease, but Jake felt something else surging, determination. It coursed through him, igniting a fire he hadn't recognized was dormant. It was no longer just about helping Lily. It was about helping himself reclaim a narrative he had lost. "Richard," he called suddenly, locking eyes with his old friend. "You remember how we used to talk about being open, about owning our battles?" The crowd's interest peaked again. "I want to be that guy today, to not shy away from what we faced but to embrace it. I want to stand with Lily and give her the space and strength to speak." Richard nodded, a glimmer of something, approval perhaps, flickered in his eyes. The ice between them was thawing, and Jake felt a connection forming, rooted not in guilt, but in shared experiences and mutual understanding. Jake didn't realize it at that moment, but this was a pivotal evolution in his relationship with Richard, a step closer to healing fractured bonds. "Lily," he said again, kneeling down to her eye level, "you don't have to do this if you're not ready, but if you choose to, we're right here with you." The intensity of his gaze held an unspoken promise. He wouldn't let her face this darkness alone. As Lily bit her lip, her gaze dropped to the ground. He felt a flicker of unease. Maybe it was selfish, he thought, wanting to bring her pain into the light when she might prefer to keep it hidden. Yet there was a quiet strength that radiated from her determined aura. It was an invitation to dive deeper into the truths that had shaped her life. Minutes passed, feelers of tension ebbing as Jake stood, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He scanned the crowd, their faces reflecting a mixture of empathy and anticipation. He took a breath, grounding himself amidst the swell of emotions threatening to spill over. But beneath it all, in the quietest throes of his mind, doubts whispered. Had he pushed too far too soon? The window of vulnerability between them felt precarious, and Jake's heart raced against the pressing weight of expectation. Was his resolve strong enough? The moment Lily chose to speak unfolded with unscripted grace, but her voice emerged shaky, capturing the essence of the struggle many felt but few dared articulate. And now, Jake faced the undeniable. A surge of both dread and exhilaration coursed through him. As Lily began to share her story, Jake steeled himself against the fears creeping back in. Every word she uttered challenged him to confront his own shadows, opening the door to vulnerabilities he had thought safely buried. But the lingering question remained, gnawing at him just beneath the surface. When the truth was laid bare, would they both rise renewed, or would they find themselves ensnared in something far darker than they had anticipated? Jake's focus sharpened on Lily as her voice emerged, trembling yet lyrical, a powerful testament to her lived experience. Each word felt like an invocation, attempting to weave her pain into the very fabric of the crowd's understanding. The atmosphere vibrated with palpable interest, but Jake's insides churned. He was witnessing a transformation, one that reflected not only Lily's vulnerability, but his own evolving identity as well. Every syllable she articulated was a brushstroke on a canvas he had longed to reclaim. Memories flashed, moments of shame, insecurities wrapped tightly around his heart like winter's frost. But here, in the space they had created together, the frost began to thaw. As she spoke about her struggles, Jake pondered over the cracks in his own facade, his inability to confront the truths that had haunted him since childhood. Why had he ever allowed Richard's words to silence him? There was power in spoken truths, and he realized that his journey was also about standing up to his internal accuser. He gripped the podium tightly, the contours digging into his palms as if it were a tether to reality, unshackling him from self-doubt. The crowd was entranced, truly listening. It was as if they had become witnesses not merely to a story, but to the fragile art of catharsis unfolding in real time. Jake slid his gaze across their faces, reading expressions of empathy, pain, reflection, and hope. He could feel their breaths in sync with the crescendo of Lily's narrative, a collaborative acknowledgement of a shared burden. And then, in that moment, Jake decided to yield to the unyielding storm of his fears. As Lily's story came to an emotional crescendo, he felt compelled to reveal his truth as well. It was messy, certainly, but it felt like the only way to fully honor her courage. "Lily," he interjected gently, "you are not alone in this. I, too, have faced shadows in my life. I've carried guilt for things I thought I couldn't change." The atmosphere shifted, now richer, more layered. The vulnerability that had been reserved for Lily expanded like a ripple through human experience, inviting others to confront their own darkness. Jake noticed Richard's brows furrow in surprise. This was a slight but significant shift from their earlier repartee, a shared recognition instead of skeptical observation. It occurred to him that personal revelations could be a bridge rather than a barrier. But his heart raced at the thought that exposing himself like this might invite criticism or rejection. Would it be viewed as pandering? He didn't know, but the moment was upon him, and hesitation would rob both him and Lily of a precious opportunity for connection and healing. In that instant of reflection, Jake committed to honesty, stripping away the pretenses that had long held him captive. As Lily paused, he took a breath and drew upon the energy circulating in the air. "I want to add my voice to this," he continued. "I was afraid of being judged, ridiculed for my failures. But there's freedom in sharing, and it pushes back against the isolation we often feel." Every pair of eyes in the crowd seemed to break open, a myriad of emotions spilling forth. The silence shifted. Jake felt they were no longer merely observers. They were participants in a dialogue that transcended personal boundaries. With renewed strength, he turned back to Lily. "You are inspiring not just me, but everyone here," he affirmed, hoping to bolster her confidence. "We are powerful when we are vulnerable." Jake's words hung heavy in the air. He realized that their shared experience was more than a profession of support. It was a call to action. To confront truths, both personal and collective, could inspire a movement of sorts, in which both speaker and listeners unwittingly metamorphosed into allies. But as the last echoes of their exchange faded away into the uncertain echoes of the crowd, Jake felt an unsettling disquiet begin to unfurl. What would happen when the applause died down? When the reality of their lives pulled them back to the surface, would he retreat into the shadows once more? The burgeoning connection between him and his audience hung in the balance, teetering on the edge of hope and chaos. Jake had ignited the spark, but what would he do when the flames of revelation began to illuminate the very parts of him he had fought so hard to keep concealed? That impending confrontation loomed ever closer, and he knew he had only begun to scratch the surface of the truths waiting to be unearthed. The moment of truth still lay ahead, lurking in the depths of his own untold story, threatening to emerge when he least expected it. With the murmurs of acknowledgement still echoing in his ears, Jake stepped back from the podium, feeling a rush of conflicting emotions. Applause washed over him like waves against the shore, soothing, yet bittersweet. The crowd seemed to dissolve into a blur as he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the glass behind the stage. A man standing between shadows and light, raw vulnerability resting with a deep-rooted fear of judgment. What about tomorrow? The question gnawed at him, the familiar anxiety creeping back like an unwelcome specter. Would he revert to the reluctant participant, the yes man who had seldom voiced his dissenting thoughts? The strings of doubt threatened to pull him back into the cocoon of silence that had stifled him for years. But Jake knew there was no putting the genie back in the bottle. He peered over the rim of the crowd. Some faces were still glistening with unvoiced revelations. Others were lost deep in contemplation. Could he really help them in recognizing their own shadows? Or was this moment merely a fleeting illusion, an ephemeral high that would fizzle into nothingness at the first sight of reality? For the first time, he felt the weight of responsibility wrapped around him, not just for himself, but for all those who had shared their authenticity. "Are you all right?" Lily's gentle voice broke through his introspection. Concern knitted her brow, and he could see a hint of vulnerability echoing his own. They were both awash in a newfound understanding. They were no longer defined by trauma, but rather united in their shared imperative to confront the truths that lay hidden. "I'm just processing," he replied, forcing a smile that felt foreign, yet earnest. "This feels surreal. What if it falls apart?" "If it does, we'll pick up the pieces," she said, her tone carrying an inflection of strength that invigorated him. It's not about perfection. It's about connection. Connection. The word resonated with an unexpected resonance within him. It wasn't merely about voicing struggles, but about weaving together fragmented experiences, pooling courage into a collective force of authenticity and healing. As applause subsided, a few audience members started approaching, tentative yet hopeful. Jake and Lily exchanged glances, a deep understanding passing silently between them. They were neither alone nor mere speakers on a stage. They had now entered into a communion, a community in the fullest sense, where voices of pain could become symphonies of resilience. Jake! A familiar voice pierced the atmosphere, and he turned to find Richard making his way toward him, his expression unreadable. Intrusive thoughts flashed through Jake's mind: fear, failure, and the sickening sensation of being judged once again. But he sensed something different in Richard's demeanor. It lacked the usual condescension. "You spoke courageously out there," Richard said, his tone shifting from skepticism to something resembling respect. "I never thought I'd hear you say those things." Jake was taken aback. Was this a ploy, an attempt to regain a semblance of control over their previous dynamic? Why alter course now? But a flicker of rebellion in him whispered that perhaps this unexpected reaction was an opportunity to confront his own perception of the man who had once inhibited his growth. "Thank you," Jake replied, making a conscious effort to stand more confidently. "It took a long time for me to find my voice, but I'm not retreating back into silence." Richard's brow furrowed, surprise etched upon his features. "That's good to hear. Just don't forget what's at stake. You have something here now. Don't squander it." His words lingered in the air between them, a warning veiled as a compliment. But beneath its surface lay the challenge Jake had been waiting for. It was time for a reckoning, an evaluation of what had truly forged his identity, worthy of the transformation before him. In that moment, Jake realized he wouldn't be settling for Richard's validation any longer. Instead, he would begin confronting the ghosts of judgment that had once silenced him. The flames had ignited. Now it was his task to walk through them. As the night fell, enveloping the crowd in a shroud of introspection, Jake's heart raced. He had emerged from a cocoon of silence, but now came the jagged edges of addressing the truths he had repressed. What would this next chapter of his journey demand from him? Next to him, Lily stood steadfast, ready to face whatever darkness loomed ahead together. But challenges awaited. Would he muster the conviction to stand firm when doses of judgment threatened to emerge anew? He could feel the pull of the past clinging to his heels, but he was finally ready to confront it. The moment for reckoning was here, but the question remained: would he emerge from it stronger or shattered? With a sense of urgency echoing through his thoughts, Jake took a deep breath and focused on the space around him. The evening air was thick with possibility, the breeze whispering hints of change. He felt it crackle in his fingertips, a surge of potential, but it came with challenges he couldn't ignore. "Let's get out of here," Jake suggested to Lily, an impulse guiding his decision. They walked together under the dim yellow streetlights, each step an affirmation that they were moving towards something greater than themselves. Jake's mind raced, wrestling with anxiety and anticipation. What would it mean to truly confront his past? The buzz of the crowd faded behind them as they entered a quiet park nearby. The serenity of the trees and the rustle of leaves felt inviting, yet intimidating. In this stillness, Jake confronted not only the world around him but also the tumult within. He sat on a bench and gazed at the sky, letting the stars illuminate the weight of his reflections. "Do you think they heard me?" he asked Lily, anxiety creeping back into his voice. It was a question more about him than the audience, revealing his deep-seated need for affirmation. "Yes," she replied, her tone steady. "But it's not about what they think. It's how you feel about your own words." Her unwavering confidence stoked a flame within him. Perhaps it was time to dig deeper, to extract meaning from the tangled shadows of his past that had haunted him. "I want to understand why I felt so afraid to speak before. What was I so afraid of?" he pondered aloud, attempting to unravel the layers that shielded his truth. Lily regarded him with thoughtful eyes, recognizing the seismic shift occurring within him. Fear is paralyzing. Maybe confronting it means looking at the moments that shaped you and allowed it to thrive, she said, her voice weaving a thread of encouragement through the fabric of his self-doubt. A moment of clarity pierced through the fog of confusion, and Jake felt a surge of determination. He needed to revisit the pivotal moments that had molded his silence, those encounters that sowed seeds of insecurity and self-questioning. The thought sent both a shiver and a thrill through him. What if understanding those moments allowed him to reclaim power over them? Do you think it's too late to rewrite my story? He leaned forward, the urgency palpable in his tone. It's never too late. We always have the power to redefine ourselves, to embrace our narratives as a journey rather than a destination, she answered, her words striking a chord deep within him. It was time to embrace the discomfort, to reflect on those encounters, especially with Richard, who stood as both a reminder of his past struggles and a living challenge for growth. Could he confront Richard thoughtfully, without the fear of losing himself in their old dynamics? The thought ignited both fright and excitement, a revelation waiting to be acted upon. He closed his eyes briefly, envisioning a confrontation, a real exchange where he asserted his newfound voice without retreating into insecurity. Richard may have underestimated me, but I can't let his perception define my self-worth anymore. Yes, that's it, Lily exclaimed as if she could sense his resolve crystallizing. It was more than a confrontation. It was a reclamation. Fueled by this epiphany, Jake stood, prepared to reshape the narrative of his journey. This newfound clarity did not erase his fear, but it wove it into a tapestry of courage and understanding. He turned to Lily, whose gentle presence felt like an anchor against the gust of change. I must act. I need to show Richard and myself that I'm capable of standing my ground. As they left the park behind, Jake felt the echo of his heartbeat sinking with a sense of purpose. There was no more retreating into a shell. He was about to step into a reality of authenticity. Yet, even as determination coursed through him, he wondered if he had the stamina to face what lay ahead. The tightrope of recognition and judgment still beckoned. Tomorrow would not just be another day. It would be a stage for confrontation, a canvas for expression. With each step he took, the weight of his past loosened its grip. But lurking in the shadows was the question he still needed to confront. Would he be able to maintain his voice in the face of Richard's criticism? Or would the silence he fought so hard to escape come rushing back to reclaim him? The morning sun broke through the horizon with a fervor that mirrored Jake's swirling emotions. As he prepared to meet Richard, the gravity of his intentions settled heavily on his shoulders. He could almost hear the heartbeat of the city, a rhythmic reminder that life continued regardless of his inner turmoil. Weeks of self-reflection equipped him with insights about his past, yet the prospect of confronting Richard remained daunting. Each moment he could feel doubt creeping in, whispering reminders of his previous failures to assert himself. What if this encounter only reinforced his insecurities? He glanced at himself in the mirror, searching for a semblance of the confidence he desperately needed. For a fleeting second, he saw a glimmer of determination in his own eyes. That spark hinted at readiness, but he knew he would have to fan those flames with action. His heart raced as he walked towards the coffee shop where he was meant to meet Richard. With each step, the cacophony of the day blurred into a murmur, overshadowed by the storm brewing in his mind. What would he say? How could he convey his feelings without reverting to the defensiveness that had always punctuated their exchanges? He needed clarity, articulation, and resolve. Arriving at the shop, Jake took a deep breath, grounding himself in the present. He ordered a coffee, each sip fortifying his spirit for the impending conversation. The rich aroma wrapped around him, igniting thoughts of how far he had come since those paralyzing days of silence. The memory of sharing his thoughts during that evening in the park with Lily seemed like yesterday, yet within those hours lay a transformative evolution. The bell above the door jingled as Richard entered, a looming figure whose very presence reminded Jake of the weight he carried for too long. Richard spotted him and ambled over, the confidence in his smile matched by an air of condescension that unsettled Jake. He resisted the urge to shrink into himself. This time, he would not let Richard's demeanor dictate his worth. "Jake," Richard began, his tone casual, "did you find what you were looking for last time?" That simple question ignited a shift inside Jake, propelling him forward. Actually, Richard, that was just the beginning. The words spilled out before he could second-guess himself. He locked eyes with Richard, forcing himself to suppress the tidal wave of doubt threatening to crash over him. "Oh." Richard raised an eyebrow, amusement dancing on his lips, as if mocking the very notion of Jake asserting himself. "Yes, and it's led me to realize some things. I've allowed your perspectives to overshadow my own voice for too long." The vulnerability that flowed through his confession surprised even him. There was no turning back now. Richard's expression shifted from amusement to curiosity, as if Jake's answer had disrupted the usual script of their encounters. Jake pressed on. "Your comments had an impact on me, something I've carried without ever properly addressing it. I want to be clear. I'm not going to allow your opinions to shape how I view myself anymore." An uncomfortable silence enveloped them, thick with the weight of unspoken history. Richard searched Jake's expression for cracks, but there, bold and unbroken, Jake maintained his ground. Finally, Richard let out a reluctant chuckle, a sharp contrast to the steeliness of Jake's resolve. "You're serious, aren't you?" "Yes, I mean it," Jake replied, feeling a buoyancy unfurling within him. For the first time, he was beginning to understand his power, an emergence from the shadow that had long defined him. The mere act of standing his ground felt like stepping into new territory, and it came with an exhilarating realization. He was rewriting his narrative, one word at a time. But Richard's smirk transformed into something more contemplative. "You think you can change that easily?" he questioned, a flicker of uncertainty breaching his facade. Jake felt his heart race, knowing his response could either solidify this changing dynamic or revert back to the instability he had wanted to escape. This was not just about gaining confidence, it was about redefining his future with each interaction. "Change isn't easy, but I'm ready to face it, one way or another." In a moment flanked by intensity, the two men grasped their differences. Jake realized he was only beginning to understand the depth of what lay ahead, not just with Richard, but within himself. This confrontation was merely the first of many, and as much as he felt empowered, a simmering uncertainty still lingered. How would their relationship evolve from this point on? With every question answered, new ones surfaced, awaiting resolution. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the opening chapter of a much larger story ready to unfold. Where would this newfound strength take him next? Jake left the coffee shop with a blend of exhilaration and uncertainty coursing through him. Each step along the sidewalk was a reminder of the confrontation he had just weathered. He could still feel Richard's curious gaze upon him, twisted with disbelief, yet faintly intrigued. It was not just a personal victory. It was a delicate unraveling of many threads woven tightly around his identity. He found himself wandering, his surroundings blurring into the background as he replayed the scene in his mind. The bustling city was a stark contrast to the cocoon of vulnerability he had just emerged from. He stopped at a park, watching people pass by, their laughter echoing against the trees, stark reminders of the freedom he sought. It struck him. The very tension that had held him captive for so long was beginning to loosen its grip. Jake sat on a bench, allowing himself a moment to reflect, knowing this was a fragile threshold he had crossed. This wasn't merely about standing up to Richard. It was something much deeper, a tangible step toward embracing his own narrative. He realized it wasn't enough to face one antagonist. This change demanded a thorough overhaul of his approach to relationships, both personal and professional. As he sat there, a striking realization dawned upon him. If he could confront Richard, why couldn't he extend that courage into the workplace? Thoughts raced through his mind about his upcoming presentations. The way he had always muffled his voice in meetings, deferring to colleagues who seemed more authoritative. How many brilliant ideas had he silenced due to an inescapable fear of judgment? Determined not to let this moment slip through his fingers, Jake crafted a plan in his head, a series of goals tied to that renewed courage. He would initiate conversations at work, share his thoughts with flair, and gain visibility amongst his peers. As the voices of past insecurities faded, he began to visualize himself advocating for his ideas with conviction. The thrill of this prospect surged through him, and before he realized it, he was surfacing from his daydream. The simmering excitement coursed through his veins like adrenaline, enhancing the crisp air around him. He figured it was all about symbolism. If he could shift his dynamic with Richard, he could reshuffle the balance closer to home too. He stood up, stretching his limbs as if shaking off the remnants of self-doubt. With an invigorated sense of purpose, he began to walk back through the park, ready to seize this new chapter. But the unresolved tension from his confrontation lingered, not just in the air but within him. A persistent question about how Richard would react to this transformation. Would he double down on the status quo, or find himself contending with a Jake who would no longer bend under pressure? As he exited the park, his path led him towards the office. Each step became a reminder of the pressures and norms he'd come to accept, yet now they felt like barriers ready to be shattered. What awaited him back at work hung in the balance, uncertain but filled with potential. What would his colleagues think of his newfound assertiveness? Would there be supporters, allies within his team? Or perhaps the challenge of skepticism awaited him, judgment from those comfortable in their established roles. It was not merely about asserting himself to Richard anymore. It was a much bigger arena now. His mind raced with the implications. Each revelation seemed to unfold like layers of potential, and he recognized the imminent confrontation wasn't just against Richard, but against the lingering ghosts of self-doubt he had carried to this moment. He emerged from the park feeling lighter yet more aware than ever. He was ready to enact change. But this wasn't just a victory. It was the beginning of a campaign that demanded strategic execution. As he approached the office, doubt crept into his thoughts, cautious yet hopeful. Could he truly maintain this new narrative in a world that often silenced the humble? With determination sparking in his chest, Jake stepped into the building, the air thick with possibility, prepared for whatever came next. One step closer to unveiling not just the true power within him, but also the labyrinth of unknowns riddled with challenges that awaited. Little did he know, one encounter would throw every plan he created into chaos, forcing him to reconsider what he truly wanted to fight for. As Jake entered the office, he felt an immediate shift in the atmosphere. The usual banal energy seemed charged with an electric current, as though his anticipation was palpable. He could hear the quiet hum of conversations, punctuated by sporadic bursts of laughter from colleagues who gathered in small clusters. For a moment, he hesitated at the entrance, scanning the room as doubt flickered through him. A stark contrast to the surge of determination he had felt moments ago. What if the assertiveness he planned to project fell flat? What if Richard noticed and retaliated in ways he hadn't anticipated? These questions loomed large in his mind, but he pushed through, resolved to forge ahead. He was not merely stepping into his workplace, he was stepping into a new version of himself, a version that asserted its voice unapologetically. He headed towards his desk, but along the way he spotted Laura, a team member known for her quick wit and clever insights, but also her quiet demeanor in meetings. Gathering a breath, Jake approached her, rehearsing the lines he had imagined throughout the day. "Hey Laura, have you had a chance to review the latest project proposal? I'd love to hear your thoughts," he began, feeling the slight tremor of vulnerability in his voice. She looked up surprised and then nodded slowly. "Not yet, but I'd be happy to chat about it. When do you want to?" The exchange was small but significant, an initial foray into collaboration that felt genuine. Jake noticed her enthusiasm as they began discussing the proposal, and for the first time, he found himself interjecting his ideas confidently, countering her suggestions with insights developed from his experiences. It was exhilarating, and every word felt like a hammer striking at the shackles of his former self. However, as they engaged in brainstorming while sipping their coffee, Richard strode into the room, his presence instantly extinguishing the warmth of camaraderie. He carried an air of authority, eyes scanning the room as if searching for potential threats to his status. Jake's heart raced at the sight. Would Richard's shadow loom over this small act of progress? Richard approached, leaning against the doorframe with a smirk. "What plans have you concocted this time, Jake?" His tone dripped with sarcasm, suggesting that Jake had once again staked a claim in territory not meant for him. Jake's stomach clenched. Yet combining the courage that had grown from his confrontation in the coffee shop, he met Richard's gaze. "We're discussing the project proposal. I believe the adjustments we're considering could significantly improve our outreach strategy," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Richard's expression faltered for a brief moment, perhaps not accustomed to hearing such directness from Jake. The flicker of surprise was quickly masked by disdain. Outreach strategy? Sounds ambitious for you. We can't all afford to get lost in daydreams, can we? A chill ran down Jake's spine, but instead of retreating, he felt a spark ignite deeper within. Ambition is what drives success, Richard. I believe enhancing the outreach is essential, considering our recent performance metrics. Each word hung in the air like a challenge. The tension escalated, and Jake felt the heat rising, both from Richard and his own visceral determination. This moment could either undo his newfound resolve, or propel it further into existence. Laura's eyes widened as she watched the exchange unfold. He was aware they were now drawing the attention of their colleagues, a gathering of witnesses to the confrontation, and for the first time, he welcomed it. "Let me know how that works out for you," Richard scoffed before dismissing them, striding away with a mix of irritation and disbelief that lingered in the room. This was it, the calculated gamble Jake had made. No longer did he perceive Richard simply as an antagonist. He recognized him as an unstable variable in his growth equation, one that could either fuel his ascent or challenge him to fortify his scruples. While the adrenaline coursed through his veins, Jake couldn't shake the gnawing awareness that Richard would not leave this unaddressed. Would he retaliate in subtle ways, or escalate his attempts to undermine Jake's evident shift in dynamics? He turned to Laura, who was processing everything with a glimmer of respect in her eyes. "You handled that well," she offered, clearly impressed. Jake nodded, accepting her validation while acknowledging that this was just the beginning of a long fight to cement his place and voice. His thoughts spiraled with a connected query. Could he begin to build a coalition with like-minded colleagues to challenge harder issues together? As Jake returned to his desk, fire and fear both crammed into his heart. He felt empowered, yet aware of the precarious nature of the transformation he was navigating. He needed to strategize, to prepare for forthcoming trials against not only Richard, but the daunting expectations of the corporate landscape. Would he marshal his new connections to confront these obstacles, or would self-doubt creep back into his mind the moment his target became clear? As tension hung thick in the air, Jake realized one truth. The true battle for his own narrative was just underway. Jake stood before the mirror, taking in the reflection of the man he had become through a series of calculated confrontations and brave revelations. There was a newfound solidity in his stance. The hesitance in his gaze had transformed into a steady resolve. Today would mark the culmination of his personal journey, a day where he would showcase not just growth, but a fierce reclamation of his narrative, not dictated by Richard or anyone else. He arrived at the office, heart steady with determination. The air buzzed with energy, a perfect backdrop for the resolve he had nurtured over time. He had already confronted Richard and asserted his voice. Now, it was time to showcase that same assertiveness in the entire team meeting scheduled later that day. Jake knew he had actionable insights that could propel the project forward, insights clouded by his previous fears, now burning brightly with conviction. As the meeting commenced, Jake felt the wall of doubt begin to crumble. He was met with familiar faces, including Laura's supportive nod as she instinctively took her seat near him. The conversation unfolded around performance metrics, just as he had anticipated. Anxiety proved to be a silent companion, but Jake embraced it. He decided to wield it rather than succumb. "Can I interject?" he called out, his voice steady and clear. The room quieted, all eyes landing on him, some questioning, others expectant. This was the moment he had worked towards. "The outreach strategy we've been following isn't meeting our targets, and I have a few adjustments based on recent analytics that could yield better results." Jake noticed Richard shifting in his seat, his face an unreadable mask. Ignoring the dissonance Richard's presence conjured, Jake unleashed his prepared insights, numbers spilling onto the table like evidence of his readiness. With each point he articulated, confidence surged further within him. Colleagues responded with enthusiasm, framing questions that pushed him to explain his rationale deeper. Jake realized he was no longer defending his right to speak. He was championing his expertise. Every nod from Laura, every supportive glance from others, thickened the air with validation. After a series of constructive discussions, Jake wrapped up with a call to action. Let's collaborate and pilot these changes. I'm convinced we can see improved metrics within the next quarter." Hushed excitement electrified the room as heads nodded in agreement. There it was. Recognition. Not just from the team, but an acceptance that he was indeed a valuable contributor. The meeting concluded with satisfied applause, an uncharacteristic accolade for initiatives previously dominated by a fear of speaking up. For the first time, Jake felt a wave of belonging wash over him. Inclusion felt tangible. Even Richard appeared caught off guard, his earlier deflection nowhere to be seen. As people filtered out, Laura approached him with enthusiasm. "Jake, that was incredible. I haven't seen you this engaged before." "Thanks, Laura. This feels new. Invigorating even." He was acknowledging not just his words but also the fierce strain of discomfort discarded in the process. Not just a victory over his whispers of doubt, but an attestation of growth. The next few weeks danced in a marathon of further meetings, discussions, and presentations. Jake's voice found its parallel in the eager dialogues of colleagues. Empowering others became part of his mantra. He learned to lead conversations instead of lingering in the shadows. One afternoon, as they prepared for another project update, Richard cornered him. "You surprised me in the meeting. I didn't expect you to take that kind of initiative," he said, the hint of sincerity partially concealed by Richard's brusque demeanor. "Surprises happen when people believe in themselves," Jake replied coolly, an arched eyebrow suggesting he meant every word. "If you tried it, you might like the results." The jab felt like a tipping point, an evolved exchange where Jake no longer shrank in Richard's stare, but stood tall. As Jake returned to his desk, he realized he had truly transformed, not just in presence, but mindset. Each conversation carved the path forward. Fear was no longer an anchor but a stepping stone. Today, Jake stood on the brink of further growth. The notion of mentoring colleagues began to take root. He envisioned starting a series of workshops to empower others in the team to share their voices. Revival through unity was his aspiration, elevating not just himself, but fostering an environment where others like him could flourish without fear. In the following weeks, he took actionable steps towards this vision, setting meeting agendas that emphasized collaboration and openness. He connected with Laura and others, encouraging them to contribute and lead discussions comfortably. The collaborative atmosphere transformed the team's dynamic. They were no longer adversaries but allies. And with every passing encounter, Jake felt his self-doubt slowly recede. Each achievement, big or small, was a testament to his metamorphosis. Would he ever escape those shadows entirely? Perhaps not. But each challenge mitigated the screams of his past, guiding him closer toward the affirmation of who he truly aspired to be. In moments of reflection, Jake recognized he had not just conquered fear, he had dismantled it entirely. He allowed himself to take pride in these tangible changes, the acknowledgement from peers, the respect he commanded, the encouragement flowing effortlessly from his newfound role as a facilitator of dialogue. It was an odyssey toward owning his narrative, and as he stood before a group one day during a workshop, he felt profound satisfaction at having established a platform for dialogue. "Now is the time for each of us to share your thoughts openly," he initiated. "Let's create a sanctuary for ideas that thrive." Today, Jake was no longer a sepulcher of vulnerabilities, but a corridor of empowerment. Each word filled the air like a luminance. The past no longer haunted him, but served as the bedrock of his metamorphosis. This was the life he chose to live, rooted in authenticity. The silence around him faded. The story continued to evolve. But Jake would wield the pen this time, ready to write anew. Now, it's your turn. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now. To feed the algorithm. It really helps our community grow. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending below. Your thoughts matter. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to support these powerful narratives that inspire growth. Don't wait even one more second.